Welcome to episode 46 of FTCE Seminar, a teacher certification podcast. I'm your host, Mercedes Musto. Today, we will be talking about some mathematical concepts to help you prepare for the FTCE General Knowledge Mathematics Subtest. Math. That's right. Calling all mathletes to do some mathletics on how to determine whether two algebraic expressions are equivalent. I love mathletes. So cool. Okay, let's get started. Concept 1, equivalent expressions. First, let's define what we mean by equivalent expressions. Imagine you have two different recipes, but they result in the same delicious cake. I love cake. Okay. But in the world of math, equivalent expressions are like those two different recipes and those two same cakes. Stay with me now. So how do we figure out if expressions are equivalent? These are great questions. Well, we will be relying on some mathematical properties of operations and equality. Going back to our recipe example, these properties are like the cooking rules that guarantee our cake turns out great every time. You may remember some of these key properties like the commutative or associative property. For addition, the commutative property tells us that the order in which we add numbers doesn't matter. For example, 3 plus 4 is the same as 4 plus 3. Similarly, the associative property lets us group numbers differently as long as we add all the same numbers together. Think about it this way. Parentheses 2 plus 3, parentheses, plus 4 is the same as 2 plus parentheses 3 plus 4 parentheses. Now, let's move on to multiplication. Remember, commutative has to do with changing the order, and the commutative property applies to multiplication too. So the same thing, 2 times 5 is the same as 5 times 2. Same with the associative property in multiplication. The associative property allows us to rearrange groups of numbers as long as we multiply all of the numbers together. So parentheses 2 times 3, parentheses times 4, is the same as 2 times, parentheses, 3 times 4, parentheses. Great. Well, now that we've got that covered, let's move on to the reflexive property of equality. The reflexive property states that any expression is equal to itself. So x is always going to be equal to x. Great. Okay, that seems clear enough. But get this. The transitive property is super cool. The transitive property states that if A is equal to B and B is equal to C, well then A must also be equal to C. Okay, so how do we use these properties to check for equivalent expressions? Let's consider an example. Suppose we have two expressions, 3x plus 2 and 2 plus 3x. Using the commutative property of addition, we know we can rearrange the terms in the second expression to get 3x plus 2. Since the order of the terms doesn't affect the value, we can see that both expressions are equivalent. Now, what if the expressions involve more complex manipulations? Don't worry. The same properties apply. We can simplify terms or rearrange terms using the properties, as long as we perform the same operations on both sides. See, the expressions will remain equivalent. It's like following the same recipe step by step, even if you use slightly different ingredients. Now, let's try to apply these ideas of expressions in an equation. You know, we've been talking about the expression 3x plus 2, which is the same as 2 plus 3x. But in an equation is when we have these expressions linked by an equal sign. Let's try this one. 3x equals 9. What to do? We can simplify, we can solve this by dividing both sides of the equation by 3. And that gives us 3 divided by 3 on one side, and that's 1, and that just leaves the x. Then Let's see what we do to one side, we do to the other. So 9 divided by 3 equals 3. So that leaves us with x equals 3. Great. What do we do now? That's another wonderful question. Let's take that x equals 3 and substitute it back into the equation to see if it's a solution. That would look like this. 3 times 3 equals 9. And yes, 3 times 3 is 9, and 9 equals 9. It's a solution. You totally rock that. That's because you are a certified mathlete. You're so mathletic. Let's review. Remember, the key is to be logical and methodical. Break down the expressions, apply the appropriate properties, and simplify terms whenever possible. If you end up with the same expression on both sides, you've got an equivalent expression. Yeah, equivalent expressions are fundamental skills in algebra. That's stuff you need to solve equations and inequalities. By understanding these properties, you'll be able to navigate the world of mathematical expressions with confidence. And get this, you will be better prepared for the mathematics subtests. For more practice with math strategies, visit FTCEseminar.com to study for the test. The important thing is to start studying today so you can pass the teacher certification exam. Well, what are you waiting for? Check us out on YouTube at FTCE Seminar and start studying today. This podcast was recorded at the Pickens Multimedia Studio at the University of West Florida. This podcast is listener supported, and contributions can be made via the listener support link on Spotify, or you can buy me a coffee at FTCE Seminar. This is your host, Mercedes Musto. Join me again on FTCE Seminar, a teacher certification podcast, so you can pass the FTCE.